Who would win? A corpse or a fresher corpse? The two handhelds of the 8th generation of gaming. Both are officially donezo, discontinued, nothing really coming out for them anymore. And it's a bit of a shame, but you know, it's gotta move on. When the 3DS was still getting games in 2019, I mean, like, that was an ulcer just waiting to pop for me. It was obviously still being supported just as a safeguard for just in case the Nintendo Switch didn't work out, and they were just trickling out a few more games like Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn and Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey, just to give the thing something. Just in case, for some reason, the Switch didn't work out. Well, hey, we're still supporting the 3DS, and we can just hop right back to making shit for this system. But while the ongoing support of the 3DS was getting a bit annoying, the ongoing support for the PS Vita was like a feel-good sports movie. Sony basically gave up on this thing as early as like 2014, 2015, but it was being kept alive by the indie scene, and thus it became kind of the go-to indie game handheld. That is until the Nintendo Switch release, and that kind of became the big indie game handheld, because really it was the only handheld that was viable in the market there for a while. But I kind of want to talk about both of these handhelds and the competition between both of them in their heyday, when they were both big new systems. Because it was like the PSP versus the Nintendo DS all over again. Except now it was far more pathetic. But let's talk about that for a second. The DS versus the PSP. On paper, the PSP smoked the DS. I mean, it was basically a PS2 to go. You got PS2-like games in the palm of your hands. You could play movies, music, browse the web, download games, all of that. But when it came down to it, the DS had more games that more people wanted to play. The PSP had a phenomenal library, but a lot of the games that released for it were kind of just like, I don't know. I'd rather just play a lot of these games on the PS2. They kind of just felt like compromised PS2 games. Whereas on the DS, you got more handheld specific games. Games designed for handheld play. Games designed for the DS's unique features. Sure, you got some compromised console experiences on there, like with Mario 64 DS, but that was like a unique situation. That was incredible to see the game that defined 3D gaming on the go, when we were all used to like fucking Super Nintendo games on our Game Boy Advance. Now we got full-fledged 3D worlds on our DS. Incredible. And while it was compromised in many ways, specifically the controls, it was something you could look past just for the novelty alone. Now, the PSP, imagine if every single game was like Super Mario 64 DS. Pretty much like, oh my god, it's a 3D game on the go. Except it kind of controls like ass now. Only one analog stick, which meant most of the time camera control was the shoulder buttons. But that's just talking about like the direct ports from PS2 to PSP. When it came to the PSP exclusives, once again, they were pretty much like watered-down PS2 games. Yeah, you got God of Wars, Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, Gran Turismo, all of these games that you came to expect on PlayStation home consoles. But they were pretty much just the same as they were on those home consoles, but they were being developed by like the B teams or even the C teams. Jak and Daxter wasn't being developed by Naughty Dog, who developed, the Jak and Daxter games on PS2. It was being developed by a different team, and the game just wasn't very great. God of War wasn't being developed by Sony Santa Monica Studio, who did, the home console God of War games. It was being done by Ready at Dawn. And, these were all, like, fine games overall. But it just kind of felt like there was no real reason to play them. Most of the time, they were prequel, side story, spin-off type things. They played very similarly to the home console games, but they were never integral to anything. Pretty much most of these games boiled down to being the PSP versions. Whereas most of the games from Nintendo's core series they would put on the DS and later the 3DS, they were the next game in the franchise. Mario Kart 7 wasn't Mario Kart to go, like something like Mod Nation Racer's Road Trip on the PS Vita. It was Mario Kart 7. This is the 7th Mario Kart. This is the direct follow-up to Mario Kart Wii. Animal Crossing New Leaf was the direct follow-up to Animal Crossing City Folk on the Wii. And yeah, Nintendo would have like B teams or C teams develop some games for their handhelds, like Yoshi's Island DS, which is fine, but it's also like, I don't know, a lot of like Sony's PSP games, it feels like nothing but like Yoshi's Island DS's. But that makes it all sound like the PSP is a pile of trash and who gives a damn about it. No, I think the PSP is fucking awesome, man. I'm just trying to make sense of the victor between the DS and the PSP. Of course, that it also makes sense that the DS was more casual friendly. It kind of appealed to a wider demographic. But even then, I remember seeing how a lot of more hardcore gamers still played more DS than PSP. The PSP kind of felt more like a cool thing that you pick up and play for a bit, but the DS kind of felt like there was more life in the games you would buy for it. You know, they were games you would come back to, while the PSP mostly had games that were kind of like, oh man, this is awesome, and then you put it in a drawer and never play it again. But I'm talking about like the Sony, like American exclusives. But there's a whole other side to the PSP, specifically with like JRPGs. Those were crazy on the PSP. You had a lot of great core experiences on that handheld if you looked further than just the big boy, the God of Wars and Ratchet and Clanks. I think both the DS and the PSP were phenomenal handhelds. And while the DS still sold way better, 150 million, pretty much twice as much of the PSP, we can't deny, you know, the PSP sold like 80 million units. That's incredible. But oddly enough, it was still seen as a bit of like an underperformer on Sony's end. I think it's just like for the amount of stuff they crammed in that thing, the amount of support they threw at it, it didn't do as well as they thought it would, you know, for something that had all those features, you know, selling 80 million compared to DS for 150 million when like the DS, you couldn't even change the system settings on the thing without having to reboot it. So it only made sense for both Nintendo and Sony to follow up these handhelds because, you know, there was obviously some things they could improve upon in a round two. So at E3 2010, we got the formal unveiling of the Nintendo 3DS, and this looked amazing. It almost seemed like we were getting like PSP quality support on the thing with all the third-party games they announced. I mean, they had Assassin's Creed, Kingdom Hearts, Metal Gear Solid, even stuff like DJ Hero and Saints Row announced for the thing. In addition to the Nintendo games, which pretty much the only thing Nintendo formally unveiled for the 3DS directly at E3 2010 was Kid Icarus Uprising, but it's like, holy shit, Kid Icarus Uprising? That was kind of like the ongoing thing requested at the time, was like a Kid Icarus revival due to Pit's appearance in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. It was kind of like, when are we going to get a Kid Icarus game? Kid Icarus for Wii, Kid Icarus for Wii. And there were projects in development, but lo and behold, E3 2010, we finally got Kid Icarus Uprising, which this game looked incredible. It looked like it belonged on the Wii. Just maybe like a little lower resolution than a Wii game, but still like, wow. I feel like the 3DS demoed incredibly well at E3 2010. It just felt like there were non-stop games coming to the platform, in addition to having a really cool gimmick being the glasses-free 3D display. But then about 6 months later, in early 2011, we got not only more details on the 3DS, but Sony unveiled their successor to the PSP, codenamed NGP, Next Generation Portable. Pretty much everybody was referring to it as PSP 2 at the time. And when it came to E3 2011, Sony actually unveiled the official name being PlayStation Vita. I don't know why they didn't just go with PSP 2. Very strange, because like home console wise, they always went with the numbers, you know, PlayStation, PlayStation 2, 3, 4, 5. They're handhelds. You do PSP and then PS Vita. It's not even like PlayStation Portable 2 would be that much harder to say than PS Vita. Like, what the hell is Vita? Well, it's Italian for life. What the hell is so life about this? It's just a more powerful PSP. But that's the thing. It was an incredibly more powerful PSP. When Sony first unveiled this thing, I mean, like, they just blew the doors open on all the games. I think the big thing that was very, very cool was the fact that they showed Uncharted running on here. Uncharted, known on the PS3 as like the definitive like showstopper. Like, oh my god, this is like the craziest graphics we've ever seen. This is the most cinematic video game experience. But hey, now we have a new one, on a goddamn handheld, like insane. Not only that, but it felt like Sony listened to all the complaints about the original PSP. Most noteworthy, dual analog sticks. Boom! And with the announcement of the dual analog sticks, Sony also announced that an exclusive Call of Duty was coming to the PS Vita. And we'll get to that. But when Sony first had their big unveiling of the NGP, Nintendo talked about launch details for the 3DS, where it would cost $250 and launch with jack shit. Yeah, so this thing had a pretty barren launch. I mean, pretty much all of the games that released with it were incredibly light. They were very shallow experiences, many of which were like there was nothing to them, and they were being sold at like full price, 30, 40 bucks. And in addition, the price point of $250 for the 3DS, it was a bit high. I mean, the original DS launched at $150. $250 was like, that was a bit more than like getting just a standard like iPod Touch or something. And that was the direct competition for these two at the time. And it's obvious Nintendo launched this thing way too early because a lot of features just weren't available at launch, specifically the Nintendo eShop. It didn't have the digital store. You couldn't download games. You couldn't download exclusive games. You couldn't download virtual console games, no DSiWare games, no retail games, nothing. So while it was a solid handheld at launch, the games just weren't really there. There were some highlights from the launch lineup, but nothing that special. Nothing you were playing past the launch. And feature-wise, it just wasn't complete. They obviously rushed this thing out. Now, Sony, on the other hand, felt like the PS Vita launched in a pretty complete state. You know, they talked about it more at E3 2011, where they gave it the final name, and they also unveiled the price point there being $250. But yeah, that was a bit of a spit in the face to Nintendo there. It was priced the exact same, very competitive. But they also offered a model for $300 that included 3G support. Well, hot damn, I can't wait to play fucking smart ass on the train. Yeah, I still see some people mention how like, oh, what if like the next Nintendo Switch or something has 3G, 4G, LTE, 5G in it, or you can go online on the go. And I'm just like, no, who gives a damn about that feature, man? It's like at this point, everybody has a smartphone. If you're gonna be paying a cellular plan, why just use your goddamn phone, man? Just use your phone, use it as a hotspot, and there you go. You can use your Switch in online mode on the train. Maybe back then this was a bit more lucrative, but the plans were ridiculous, and it was only through AT&T. No! But either way, the Vita launched late that year in 2011 in Japan, and then it launched here in North America in early 2011, like in February. Had this weird, like, early launch thing, and they're doing that these days. You know, Starfield did this, where it's like you pay extra to get the game early. I'm like, it's not early, that's just the release day. You're paying way more to play it on its actual release date. So the Vita had the first edition bundle launch like 2 weeks early. I'm like, that's just the goddamn release date. That's just when the system launched. Why are you acting like in 2 weeks? Oh no, it's actually coming out. Like, no, it actually came out like 2 weeks earlier. But that was a cool bundle. I bought that bundle secondhand on eBay because I always thought it was pretty dope. Came with all this extra stuff. You got this really nice hardshell case, which I really like. You get a 4 gig memory card, which was a big problem with the Vita, the fact that you still needed memory cards, and little deviants. Who doesn't want little deviants? The launch lineup for the PS Vita was honestly fantastic. There was a ton of stuff available, and like it was like the heavy hitters were there day one. You had Uncharted, you had Mod Nation Racers, you had Hot Shots Golf, and then you also had Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Rayman Origins, Wipeout, Touch My Katamari. You also had, Michael Jackson The Experience. It was an amazing launch lineup. There was non-stop stuff to play on the Vita, and a lot of stuff that showed off like how powerful and how great this system looked. And then they gave up. Yeah, Sony pretty much blew their load at the launch of the Vita, giving it all these amazing games at the start, but then afterwards, just like nothing really happened on the thing. think that holiday, they were pretty much banking on like Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation and Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified really carrying them. Stupid. Now, they definitely had some games released for it after the fact that were like amazing stuff like Gravity Rush and Tearaway, but in the end, like, it just didn't matter, man. The 3DS may have had its growing pains, but when it got started, it really got started, and it never really ended. Game after game just kept getting pumped out for the thing. By 2013, we were getting Animal Crossing and Pokemon, 2D Zelda, all this stuff. It was over. I mean, 2013, pretty much all that came out for the Vita at that point was Tearaway. And Tearaway is a super cool game, but it just wasn't enough. By that point, Sony threw in the towel. It was over. However, the fan base kept the Vita alive, and it definitely kept going for a few years after that. Sony did try a bit more with stuff like the PlayStation TV being a small box with basically the internals of a PS Vita, meaning a lot of games you could play from the Vita on your TV for a bit of a cheaper price. And in addition, they did actually release a redesigned PS Vita, a slimmer, more cost-effective one for only $200. And alongside that, Sony announced like they were doing a couple games for it. But they were obviously lower effort. I think around when they did the PS Vita Slim, they put out the God of War collection, which included God of War 1 and 2. But that was pretty much it. The indie support and the fans kept the Vita alive for far longer. It went on for a couple more years after that. But when it came to actual full-fledged support, the 3DS won hands down. But even then, in this era, handheld gaming was kind of starting to fade away, at least it felt like it. Because this was around the time where mobile gaming was seen as like, oh man, this is what's gonna be big. This is what all people care about. Nobody can do anything about this. So the 3DS sold around 70 to 80 million units, which once again, ain't too bad, but you know, in comparison to Nintendo's other handheld sales numbers, yeah, things were definitely moving in a bit of a lame-ass direction. The PS Vita ended up only selling like anywhere from 10 to 20 million units. And after all of this, it's fair to see why a company like Sony kind of viewed handheld gaming as, this is dead, you know, hey, just focus on mobile. However, with the Nintendo Switch releasing in 2017, made it obvious that, hey, mobile gaming is its own thing. It's not taking over handhelds. Just handhelds had to evolve. Ended up feeling like don't compete with mobile gaming, rather offer something that mobile gaming just really can't. And while these did that, they were kind of sacrificial lambs in this era. From like 2012 to like 2016, there's kind of this stigma where it's like, oh man, my phone can do everything. I'm just gonna let my phone do this all. I can play games on my phone. I can listen to music on my phone, do all this, take pictures with my phone. Why would I need a video game player, a camera, a music device? But I think devices like the Nintendo Switch kind of prove that it's more fun to have dedicated devices for certain things. Yeah, you can play games on your phone, but it's nice to have a dedicated device just for video games, you know? It's not fun to have literally every single element of your life just blaring at you in the face on your phone. You know, it's fun to collect vinyl or have a dedicated music player that's really focused on pumping out high-quality music. You know, and it's fun to have like a Polaroid camera or a really high-end DSLR. And I think these consoles came out at the wrong time. If the PS Vita came out these days and had more updated specs, I think it would do okay, at the very least. I think it would sell more than the Vita did originally back in 2012. These just kind of came out during a bad time when mobile gaming was kind of seen as like, well, let's just do this for now. But while the 3DS persevered, I kind of want to take a look at both of these and see which one is the better handheld. First up, let's talk about design across all the different units here. So I have the Nintendo 3DS XL and the original PS Vita here. I just have the 3DS XL here mainly because this is probably the 3DS I'm probably the most nostalgic over. This is definitely the one that I played the most. I mean, this was the 3DS that was out during the release of Super Smash Bros. For 3DS. I definitely got my time out of this one here. But to be honest, the 3DS across all of the variations has never been my favorite handheld when it comes to the feel. The smaller units feel cramped. They don't feel that crazy great to hold and play. The bigger units definitely feel a bit better, but with something like the original 3DS XL, it just feels a little bit cheaper than I'd like it to. Now the PS Vita, on the other hand, this thing is the most premium damn device I've ever held in my life. You know what's really nice? These little grips on the back. They almost feel like they're like part of like a third-party accessory you'd insert onto this thing for better grip, but no, they're just here. They're just on the device. It does really help. It kind of makes it feel a little better. You know, you kind of put one of your fingers here with your others on the shoulder buttons, and it all works out pretty well. Though, I wouldn't say this is also one of the most comfortable devices out there. For being such a premium device, it's a little lame that we don't have any method of protecting the screen like we do with the 3DS. Of course, this is a different vibe, you know, the clamshell design. It's a different beast compared to this design here. Not every handheld device has the clamshell design. It's not necessary, but I do always feel a little worried about using my Vita because of how premium it feels. You feel all this glass, you feel just how, frankly, expensive it feels, which is cool. But it doesn't make for something that I'm like begging to put my hands on, you know? It's not like, oh my god, this is the best feeling device of all time. Rather, it just feels cool to hold. The 3DS, I feel, is a little more functional when it comes to just playing on. You know, I don't really care as much about this. The cheaper feeling does help when it comes to just being more comfortable holding it. And when I say comfortable, I don't mean like, oh man, it feels so great in my hands. Rather, I feel at peace when I'm using a 3DS. I couldn't care less about what happens to this thing. However, talking about the redesigns, here we have the PS Vita Slim, or the PS Vita 2000. And this is definitely a bit different. It doesn't seem immediately that different. They look very, very similar. But you know what's nice about this one? Bigger grips on the back. I think this feels a little better to hold than the original. It's a bit thinner with bigger grips, so it just kind of makes for a slightly more comfortable feel in the hands. However, this version does have a lamer screen. No, it's not that much lamer. It's just like an LCD screen in comparison to the OLED screen on the Vita. Now, what's the main difference? Well, this one just has far better colors. And as a colorblind individual, who gives a damn? I mean, to be fair, I can definitely tell how much blacker the blacks are on an OLED screen. I mean, it's like pitch black. It's super cool, and it looks phenomenal. However, it's not necessary. OLED is nice, I'm never gonna deny that, but when it comes down to it, I do think the PS Vita Slim is probably the go-to one here. Also consider the fact that this has 1 GB of internal storage. What? Holy shit. Now that's a deal. Yeah, that was really stupid on this one. It had absolutely no internal storage. You couldn't put anything on it. Absolutely anything. You had to get a memory card. This thing was useless outside of playing, like, you know, card games, you know, retail physical games. You could play those on here, but you couldn't save anything. You couldn't download anything on here. Absolutely pointless. I don't know why Sony was so stingy with the Vita and internal memory, but hey, we got a gigabyte, meaning you can do stuff with this at the very least. Stuff is possible on the PS Vita 2000. I'll give it that. The 3DS definitely had far more redesigns, so you can definitely find like the one that suits you the best. Here we have the new 3DS XL, which definitely feels more premium than the original 3DS XL. The original 3DS is definitely really cramped, doesn't feel the greatest. However, it does have this like weirdly premium feeling design. I don't think it looks that great because they do like this weird little like glittery design. It's like this weird like layer cake looking ass thing, but at the very least feels like, you know, like, hey, this is a premium product. This ain't no like whatever flimsy little cheap plasticky thing, even though it kind of is. But the new 3DS XL kind of brought the best of both worlds. You know, it brought the bigger, more comfortable feeling layout and buttons of the 3DS XL, but, you know, a bit of the premium feel of the original 3DS, kind of making this definitely the definitive 3DS handheld. And yeah, this is definitely the best feeling 3DS of the bunch. But once again, I wouldn't say this is obscenely comfortable. It works, it does the job. You know, I'm just tired of not feeling any damn grips, you know, when I'm holding something this big. And the PS Vita 2000 actually has that. I just feel like this is maybe just a little bit nicer to hold for extended periods of time. Just kind of feels a bit like you're holding a phone for an extended period of time, which haven't we all? The new 3DS XL is definitely a bit heavier, and with the shoulder buttons here, having to reach for the ZR and ZL ones, while these are barely used in many games, yeah, it just kind of feels a little awkward. And then in addition, we have the C-Stick here, which is a nice addition, but it's stupid. Just a little weird, man. It's touch sensitive, it doesn't move, and it does work, but I just kind of wonder, like, man, like, what? You really couldn't have put, like, a second circle pad just, like, right here, and then put the star and select buttons, like, around here? I don't understand why the C-Stick is the way it is, why they couldn't have just put a second circle pad here if they were gonna do this, which doubles as a second circle pad. And you know what else is funny? Like, 3DS systems kept moving the placement of the stylus. On the new 3DS systems, it's down here. Well, that's dumb. On the 3DS XL, they put it where it belongs, you know, on the right side. Now, of course, you know, there are lefties out there. I'm not gonna deny that, but pretty much the stylus is always oriented towards the right end of the system. So, you know, it's always designed with that in mind. Yeah, this is not my favorite placement here. The original 3DS has it worse with it being, like, up here, which is just ridiculous. The stylus placement is always in a different place, definitely because of the internals of the system. Nintendo definitely didn't put it here just because they thought this is the best spot for it. But what am I trying to say by rambling about all this stuff? Well, pretty much every single 3DS system has some negatives. Much like the PS Vita systems, you either get a great screen or a slimmer, more comfortable design. What do you want here? But to be honest, I have always loved the PS Vita design for just how damn premium it is. Once again, this isn't like, oh my god, the most comfortable thing of all time, but I think it is decently comfortable for what it is. It does the job. The 3DS systems vary in terms of comfortability. I think the XL systems are the most comfortable, but even then, they do have some design elements where I'm just kind of like, come on, man, why? It either feels pretty damn cheap, or they have something going on here where it's like, come on, man, why is the stylus here? Why do the C-Stick? And I will give Sony this, while the PS Vita is derivative of the PSP design, everything feels a lot more coherent than with the 3DS. This looks a little dumb, doesn't it? This kind of just feels like you took the DS and added a bunch of upgrades, but that's about it. You know, you didn't really redesign anything to be like, oh my god, yeah, all these upgrades feel coherent. Nah, the bigger top screen, the smaller bottom screen, it just all kind of feels like a mishmash of random bullshit sometimes. I'm not saying this is bad or not comfortable or doesn't feel like not cheap, at least in this regard. This always felt a little cheap to me. But I think overall, the PS Vita has a better aesthetic, is generally pretty comfortable. The 3DS XLs are pretty comfortable. The original 3DS, meh. The 2DS, a lot of people will fight for that design. I've never really been a big fan of how it felt in my hands. The new 2DS XL, the Vita wins. For the next round, let's talk about features and just graphical capabilities, man. Like, which one is the most impressive when it comes to the technical specifications, how the games look, and what these systems can do. Well, let's not beat around the bush here. Obviously, the Vita is far more powerful. Games look and run nearly on par with PlayStation 3 software, which is incredibly impressive, but it never reaches that entirely. Of course, back in 2012, when I was seeing PS Vita games, I couldn't tell the difference between like Uncharted Golden Abyss and Uncharted 3. Nowadays, yeah, it's very obvious. Still doesn't take away from how impressive a game like Uncharted Golden Abyss is on the PS Vita, but nonetheless, you can see just how pixelated it can look and how, like, whatever, some backgrounds just are obviously just JPEGs, but they do it all in smart ways. This is a handheld from 2012. Obviously, they're gonna try and trick your eyes a couple times here and there. Overall, this looks fantastic. Most Vita games still hold up very well today, and back then, they looked incredible. However, I would say the PSP always impressed me just a bit more. By the time the Vita came out, this style of game on a handheld wasn't nearly as impressive as that style of game on the PSP when the PSP came out. I mean, on mobile phones, I remember when they were putting out games like Infinity Blade. That's a series of games by like Epic Games that was meant to just showcase what you can do on mobile platforms, how far you can push mobile platforms. And yeah, I mean, those look like damn near console games. I haven't seen those games in a long time, and they've been delisted for a while, so who the hell knows how they hold up looking these days. But back then, at the very least, they looked like stuff you would see on console and on PS Vita as well. The 3DS, obviously, just isn't as technically capable as the PS Vita. There's no getting around that. It's definitely more in line with the original PSP. But even then, I would say the PSP games on that platform, they definitely age a bit better than the 3DS. At the very least, the 3DS does have kind of its own vibe going with it. That's what I really like about, game consoles that have limited capabilities when it comes to, their graphics. However, when we look at stuff like Resident Evil Revelations on the 3DS, I mean, like, outside of the resolution, that looks like it belongs on the Vita. So it always depended on the game and who developed it and how much money was sunk into it. But for the most part, obviously, the Vita does win in the graphics department. But let's talk about features, all right? Backwards compatibility is usually a big selling point feature, one that a lot of people don't use, but it's nice knowing it's there. And the 3DS, thankfully, pretty much has full backwards compatibility with the DS. That is, outside of the games that utilize the GBA slot. I mean, you can pop them into the 3DS, but you're not going to be able to control them. But DS games always looked a little blurry on the 3DS. Never my favorite way to play DS games. They just don't look as crisp as I'd want them to. You can do kind of a thing where you hold down a button combination to get the original resolution of the DS games on the 3DS, but they're tiny. When you do that on the 3DS, the DS games take up 20% of the screen. They just don't look amazing on these screens. However, they still play perfectly fine, and it's incredibly convenient to be able to play both DS and 3DS on this console. Vita backwards compatibility is a funky little fucker. It doesn't, but it kinda does. It's one of those weird things where when I look up, does PS Vita have backwards compatibility? Pretty much anybody will say, yeah, kinda. I'm like, no, it doesn't. I mean, just certain PSP games are available on the Vita store. You can download PSP games on here. Also PS1 games on the PlayStation store. But for the most part, I mean, you gotta buy them digitally. You can't, there's no way you're playing PSP games physically on this thing. Now, digital backwards compatibility, yeah, that's there. So I get it, whatever, but it is limited. Not every PSP game that was on the PlayStation Store for the PSP is available on the Vita store. And not every retail PSP game was made available digitally. So, yeah, it's like you're taking the PSP library and cutting it in half and cutting it in half again. However, yeah, you can play some PSP games on here, and it is pretty convenient. It's actually pretty nice because some games on the PSP work best on the Vita because you can remap certain buttons, and so for first-person shooters or games that would benefit from a second stick, you can remap buttons so then you can use the second stick. Now that's just talking about the exact previous console generation, but both of these systems can play legacy content before the DS or PSP. The PS Vita store has PS1 classics on it, while the 3DS eShop has NES, SNES, Game Boy Color, Game Gear. It could play Game Boy Advance games. I mean, these can play so much stuff. Of course, these are all on digital stores that, yeah. But let's talk about, these systems in their heyday. PS1 games versus everything the 3DS can do. Virtual console games on the 3DS were really cool. I loved getting those old school Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, mainly because you just don't see them re-released as often as NES games, which you also got on the 3DS, in addition to 3D Classics, which were remade, mostly NES games. And then Super Nintendo games were exclusive to this thing. The new 3DS systems. Yep, that was the only way you could play Super Nintendo games. That was dumb. Yeah, there's definitely no reason why Super Nintendo games couldn't be playable on a regular 3DS. It's pretty obvious they just wanted yet another reason for you to upgrade to a new 3DS, kind of add another bullet point to the list of benefits. But it's just kind of dumb. I mean, that's just kind of making it feel like us as consumers couldn't fathom SNES games working on original 3DS hardware. That's ridiculous. Oh my god, now they can finally work. It's just like, BS. You just made these new 3DS exclusive just to give the new 3DS more of a purpose. But still, they're there if you want them. In addition, I mean, you got Game Gear, you have Game Boy Advance to those who bought the 3DS before it got a price cut. There's seriously a ton of stuff you can play on the 3DS. And that's not even counting stuff like the original eShop games. But what's more impressive, all the old-ass 8-bit systems the 3DS can play, or PS1 games? This one is tricky, man. I mean, the 3DS definitely has the quantity, and it also has quality. I mean, some of the games on the 3DS Virtual Console were some of the best games ever made. But at the same time, it's like you're gonna get a bit higher quality and more playtime out of most of the PS1 games available on the PlayStation Vita store. So it's really tricky. I feel like it kind of depends on what kind of consumer you are, if you gravitate more towards PlayStation 1 games or the old school Nintendo stuff. Me personally, I've always been a Nintendo guy. Wow, really outed myself there. So I would normally pick the 3DS for that, but at the same time, I'm so used to all the games that were re-released on the 3DS Virtual Console. It's not that exciting. The PS1 games on the PS Vita, now that's a hell of a lot more exciting, honestly. However, I'd probably give it to the 3DS overall. But in addition to all of that, the PS Vita has cross-compatibility with the PS3 and PS4, so numerous games that you buy on the PS4 and PS3, you automatically get on the Vita. I mean, that was like one of the worst aspects of being a Nintendo fan in this era. That wasn't happening, and it really sucked because the Wii U and 3DS, half of the games that were releasing on either or were coming out on the other platform. Oh my god, Super Mario World is coming out on the new 3DS. Who gives a damn? I already bought that on the Wii U, and you're asking me to buy it again? PlayStation Vita, you got like all the PS1 games that you would buy on PS3, yeah, you could just download those on your PS Vita free of charge. And hell, some retail games, some actual big boy titles had cross-buy, where let's say you buy Sly Cooper Thieves in Time on PS3, you get a code for the PS Vita version right in that box. It's awesome, and totally makes up for me not using damn near any of the other features of the PS Vita. It's weird, it feels like Sony kind of crammed a lot of junk in the Vita, just as a response to the fact that the 3DS had a lot of similar things. So 3DS has Street Pass, Vita has Nier. I don't know what the hell Nier is. Now, I never owned a Vita back in the day, but I watched a hell of a lot of reviews and people talking about it on YouTube. And back in like 2012, 2013, when I would watch a lot of Vita reviews, whenever somebody would like take out a Vita and review the hardware, they never talked about Nier. They would like scroll past it on the menu screen. They're like, yeah, then there's Nier. In comparison, 3DS had Street Pass, and everybody knows what the hell Street Pass is. I mean, like, it's something that people are begging for in the Nintendo Switch, but yeah, it was all in 3DS, and it was a really cool feature that I barely used. The 3DS was stuck in the sock drawer for me most of the time. Just kind of pop it out whenever I was playing it before like bedtime or something, you know. But I still really think Street Pass is a phenomenal idea, and it's obvious a lot of people really loved it. Just like the AR games in the 3DS, which there's a similar thing in the PS Vita. Nobody fucking used it. The Vita is jam-packed with loads of features, but how many of these did people actually use? Welcome Park? Yeah, so this is basically just a tutorial on how to use such exciting things about the PS Vita, such as the back touchscreen and the touchscreen. We have a web browser, we can access messages, and we can link to the PS4, which enabled a big thing that Sony was pushing with the PS Vita's hell. They're still pushing remote play, being able to play what's on your PS4 on your Vita through Wi-Fi, which is a cool little bonus feature, but I don't think it works well enough and is really used enough to really push it. Such a massive damn feature. But I think what's super impressive about the Vita is how fully featured it is as a traditional PlayStation system. We have trophy support, your friends, messaging, party chat. It's all here. And in addition, you can watch videos, play music, go through photos, use the 2 cameras on the device. There's a lot packed in this to make sure the Vita feels like a full console experience on the go. However, as lacking as the 3DS is as a fully featured hardcore gaming experience, you don't have that messaging system, you don't have chat. To be fair, the 3DS isn't a system that really takes advantage of that kind of stuff anyways. It's like, yeah, those features would be nice if it was there. I mean, the types of games you're playing on the 3DS, why are you gonna need those? And I would say a lot of the features on the Vita, honestly, these days feels kind of like it's bloated. Like it's something where it's like, how many people actually use the Vita to listen to their music? On the 3DS, you can similarly listen to your music, but this is more so in the form of an application that's designed to be something you dick around with. You can plug in an SD card with some songs you want to play, but at the end of the day, Nintendo 3DS Sound is mainly here to record sound bites and just mess around with them. Same with Nintendo 3DS Camera. These are supposed to be just fun, dumb little things to use rather than being here for like some kind of productivity use. Which on a game console like this, I don't really see the point in actually using the camera for anything other than dicking around. I don't see the point in using microphone or the SD card slot to play music for anything other than dicking around. We have a lot of preloaded software here, like Face Raiders, AR games, Street Pass. You can make all the Miis in the world you want. You have some useful little additions like game notes, and you have your friend list and web browser. You have Miiverse, which was added later via an update. It's not as robust, the Vita feels like this is almost like an iPhone replacement. But it's like, are you really going to be using the email app? Are you really going to be using the calendar app? A lot of the stuff here just feels like it's trying to add a lot of value to the Vita as an all-purpose device when that's not what it's meant for, and it just kind of feels like it's just bloating the home screen, Now, to be fair, when it does come to those things like the web browser and let's say also video playback, the Vita is obviously superior. Sure, the 3DS has the 3D screen, so you could theoretically watch 3D video, which is what I was really hoping something like Netflix was going to be when Netflix was announced to be coming to the 3DS. I was like, oh my god, 3D movies on my 3DS. Never really ended up happening. You could watch certain 3D video, but it was all very limited. And the 3D video wasn't really the 3DS's strong suit. It was mostly down to interactive software. That's when 3D was awesome on the 3DS. The Vita, on this original model, we have an OLED display, we have a nice widescreen multi-touch display. Yeah, it's quite a bit better here. So while the 3DS has more refined features that are better suited for like what you're going to use that system for, I think I'd be absolutely ridiculous to not give the Vita the features and graphical capabilities point. It's the PlayStation Vita, for crying out loud. The 3DS has its strengths, but the Vita is the Vita, man. But it all comes down to this. The games, the library, which one? 3DS. Yeah, this one really is no contest. Even though the Vita won the first 2 rounds, I think the 3DS wins when it comes to the most important thing here. It's pretty similar to how it worked with the DS and PSP. When you compare the two, the PSP is probably gonna win when you put them up against each other, but in the end, the 3DS has some of the best software out there. Now, that's not to say the Vita has a bad library, but I feel like what Sony was trying to do with it was a bit misguided. Let's take a look at the launch title that they really pushed the most with the system, Uncharted Golden Abyss. It's a good game. It does the job. It's Uncharted on the go. That's great, but that's all it is. It's Uncharted on the go. It's once again one of these prequel side stories done by not the actual developer of that series. So who the hell cares? You're not missing out on anything by not playing Uncharted Golden Abyss. Originally, you know, like when they were doing the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection for the PS4, remastering the first 3 games, you know, I was kind of like, what the hell? Why don't they include Golden Abyss? And Naughty Dog was kind of like, hey, you know, like we just want to do like the Naughty Dog games. And after playing Golden Abyss, I can see why. That game is just a fucking nothing sandwich, man. For what it is, it's good, and it's an impressive feat to see like this pretty full-fledged Uncharted game on the Vita. But at the same time, like, there's just nothing to it. It's such a generic Uncharted game that means nothing to the overall story. It hits the notes of what an Uncharted game needs to be and do, but at the same time, you know, like, why are you playing Uncharted? I'm kind of playing Uncharted to get that, whatever, that action movie, summer blockbuster kind of fun adventure experience. And you want that on a big TV and see this beautiful, gorgeous game and feel like you're a part of a movie. You're not getting that on a tiny-ass display like this, so it just feels very confused. It doesn't feel noteworthy. It doesn't feel like you need to play it. Once again, it's a fine game. I'm still very impressed with Golden Abyss. I think it's a fine game. But it's completely superfluous. And that's what most of the Vita's AAA lineup feels like. You don't need any of these games. You look at stuff like Killzone Mercenary. That was labeled as like, oh my god, this is the Vita game. When it came out, people were like, oh my god, play this game. It's so well done, it's so beautiful, it's so great. And I played it, and it's basically just like, it's just like a Killzone's greatest hits game. The campaign is like 4 hours long, and it's just kind of like whatever. It's just a first-person shooter, man. That's all it is. There's nothing special about it. There's nothing special about Killzone Mercenary. It's a good-looking first-person shooter on the Vita. To some extent, a lot of like something like that feels the same as like those like iPhone games, like Modern Combat or something, where it's kind of like a Call of Duty ripoff. The only reason why you're playing it is to get that first-person shooter experience on your phone. The only reason why you're playing Killzone Mercenary is to get a first-person shooter experience on the Vita. And it's weird because, like, this system should have had so many more first-person shooters. I mean, this was during the big era of first-person shooters, when it felt like nothing. People were like, oh, we gotta make an FPS. And yeah, because you have the dual sticks now. And pretty much every FPS that came out for this system outside of Killzone Mercenary, which was, you know, it's a good game. It's fine. But like back when it came out, people were like lauding it as like, oh my god, this is incredible. And I'm like, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, you have Resistance Burning Skies, which was just fart, and then Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, which was done by the same people as Resistance Burning Skies, which is generally labeled as the worst Call of Duty. I beat that game. I went through a lot of Vita games a while back, and I plowed through Black Ops Declassified, which is pretty much like a 2-hour-long story mode, which is just like a couple of missions, and that's about it. There's really no cutscenes, it's just kind of like a bunch of missions strung together. And it's pretty laughably bad. It's not great. And you have like PS3 ports like Sly Cooper Thieves in Time and PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. Now those are cool to have on here. I wish they would do that more with PS3 games. But, you know, obviously the Vita actually isn't as powerful as a PS3, so I think they had to be selective about which PS3 games to bring over. But I do feel like the Vita was at its strongest with its fully original new IPs. I'm talking Gravity Rush, and I'm talking Tearaway, baby. Gravity Rush, I've sung the praises of enough. I primarily played the PS4 remaster, but I also went back and played the Vita version, which is still quite excellent. It's a great game on either device. But, you know, the PS4 version is so good. It does kind of show, like, game isn't necessary to be on the Vita. I believe Gravity Rush started as a PS3 game, so that should show you it's just like, yeah, it's a really great Vita game, but it's not like Tearaway, which was fully made from the ground up for the Vita. And that came out for PS4 as well, so what does that tell you? But to be fair, Tearaway on the PS Vita is designed to take advantage of like literally every single stupid little bit of gimmick on this device, and it does a great job. It's such a cool little 3D platformer. And on the PS4, they had to, it is the same game, but they pretty much had to tweak a bunch of stuff. So then it takes advantage more so of the PS4's DualShock controller rather than all the PS Vita features. And it doesn't feel as coherent, but it's still a great game. But when it came down to it, the Vita's library is really made 10 times better by the JRPGs on it, and also the indie games, all right? There is just a ton of stuff to play on here if you're more into some nicher experiences, there's some genuinely like crazy great indie games on here. You know, Hotline Miami, Fez, Undertale, Shovel Knight, pretty much like any of the major indie games from this era was on the Vita, and this was like the coolest platform to play them on just because of the beautiful display, the great controls. It just felt like, a great pick up and play a couple indie games, put it down. Great device for that. However, that's in comparison to the 3DS, which also had a ton of great indie support on here, in addition to, Nintendo games. And I can just name off some off the top. Okay, Mario 3D Land, Link Between Worlds, Mario Kart 7, Animal Crossing New Leaf, Fire Emblem Awakening, Pokemon X and Y, Super Smash Bros. For 3DS, Kirby Triple Deluxe, and Planet Robobot. Then you also have stuff like Metroid Samus Returns and the Mario and Luigi games. Pretty much the entire series there is playable on this device. You have Kid Icarus Uprising. Then you also have Resident Evil Revelations, which is insane on the platform. Then you also have Kingdom Hearts 3D, Metal Gear Solid 3D, Super Street Fighter 4 3D Edition. And then we also have Star Fox 64 3D, Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask 3D, Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, the original Luigi's Mansion, WarioWare Gold, Rhythm Heaven Mega Mix. Yeah, the 3DS definitely succeeded because of Nintendo's support. There ain't nothing like a Nintendo first-party game. And to the same extent, there ain't nothing like a Sony first-party exclusive game. PlayStation has an incredible lineup of IP. The problem is, I just don't really feel like that IP is strong enough to warrant people buying a handheld like this for. I think it's strong enough to warrant buying a big boy home console for, because you're going to get those other third-party games you like, and it's going to be supported by the best of the best. The PS Vita, you're not as sure about that. Sure, you may like Uncharted, but do you really like Uncharted enough to buy a handheld just to play a B-tier Uncharted game that's like that doesn't add anything to it's just Uncharted on the go? That's all it is. Pretty much every game Nintendo put out on the 3DS was done as like, hey, this is the next installment in our legacy franchise. Kid Icarus Uprising was the next installment in the Kid Icarus series after like 20 years. Super Mario 3D Land was the next mainline Mario game. New Super Mario Bros. 2, same thing. Mario Kart 7, same thing. Super Smash Bros. For 3DS, same thing. The games on here were treated as important. They were treated as the next games in their respective series. The games Sony pushed on here weren't that. They were the portable versions of those games. And there's a difference. So yeah, overall, I would say the Vita wins overall when it comes to hardware, obviously. But when it comes to games, the 3DS wins. And that's kind of all that really matters. So you can kind of take that for what it is. 3DS wins when it comes to games. PS Vita wins overall in this 3-round punch-out. It's a close call because I think these are both excellent handhelds. But when it comes to the game lineup, I think Vita, you kind of have to dig for the amazing experiences. I'm not saying they aren't there, but when it comes to like, oh, what are the first games you think about when you think of the Vita? It's usually like the AAA stuff that it is high quality. It's cool to see running on here, but like, they just don't matter at the end of the day. Like, they just, nobody cares. Nobody cares about those types of games on a handheld. You need to put your all into these games. You can't just fart it out to some other random developer. You need to make, like, it needed to be Uncharted 4 or Uncharted 5, whatever on the Vita, not some dumb little spin-off. But the Sony wasn't really willing to take the risk on it. And it would have been weird to see Uncharted 4, the next numbered Uncharted game exclusive to the Vita. But it's like, Nintendo does that kind of stuff. And because of that, their handheld succeed. So yeah, it's a tale as old as time. Where the Sony handheld succeeds in terms of hardware, the Nintendo handheld succeeds in the form of games. Tale as old as time, since 2004.